Welcome to Little by Little Homeschool podcast. Today, I am blessed to be joined by Linda Lacour Hobar of the Mystery of History. I can't wait for this conversation. Welcome, Linda. Can you
Thank
share?
you.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about yourself for anybody who's listening who's maybe not familiar with who you are?
Sure. I guess first and foremost, I'm just a girl that was crazily inspired to write world history. It started with writing for my own kids and it grew. So I am the author of The Mystery of History. As a background to that, I homeschooled my own children for 17 years. They're now all grown and we're into the grandchildren phase of life. So yeah, that's me. I live in Tennessee and I have moved around several states because we were formerly with Campus Crusade for Christ. So we're formerly missionaries. And so that's just kind of a nutshell of our family. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I feel like a little bit like for my family, like for homeschool families, I feel like a little bit like I'm talking to a celebrity here because in my home, we're going to talk about the mystery of history. In my home, you were like a celebrity. And that's just kind of what I told my kids who are now older, 22, 20, and 17. I was like, guess who I get to talk to? My daughter was like, oh my goodness, that's so cool. So welcome. I'm excited. So now, now my young adults think I'm cool. So
yeah. Oh, and I always let people know very fast. It's like any of that wears off really fast once you get to know me.
Oh, I know. I say people are just people. So can you tell us what is the mystery of history?
Well, sure. It is basically a world history curriculum. We wrote it for all ages, and it's from a biblical worldview. Now, our tagline, we have 3 C's. We say that it is chronological, Christian, and complete. I won't elaborate too much on that, but chronologically, there's 4 volumes. So it's ancient, medieval, Renaissance, and modern. That's important. And then by Christian, it means that ultimately we look toward the Word of God as being like our source of truth and our standard, not just my opinion or someone else's opinion, because, there's a lot of views out there, but we try to give it a biblical worldview. And as far as complete, what we mean is that I try to give you everything you would need in a history curriculum, like a one-stop shop. I don't want you to have to go to the library for additional books or have to do this or have to do that. I just try to give you everything for a course. Now, we're not related to other subjects. We're a standalone world history, but the advantage of that is that I've given you what I hope is the best of the best just for world history. So that's us.
Now, I found the mystery of history back when we decided we were going to start homeschooling, and we had not done even 1 minute of homeschooling. My kids were still in school and decided we were going to pull them out, went to a homeschool convention as the Lord laid it out. It was perfect timing. And I was so overwhelmed. And I just felt like I had to do individual science and individual history. And when I came across the mystery of history, it was partly, I would say, selfish because I wanted to do something chronological. Mm-hmm. My mind was confused from school about history. I didn't know. I would hear maybe names of Napoleon, Genghis Khan, Shakespeare, just all these names. And I didn't know where they fit in with each other. Mm-hmm. I didn't know who came first. There were some things that were obvious. Obviously World War I came before World War II. But even the names that went along with those, I didn't understand. And so selfishly, I chose this curriculum to go through and just the first book, just the first volume. And we went through and I was hooked. And as I was telling before we started recording, I've gone through it twice because my 2 older are closer in age and then my youngest. And we just really enjoyed, I also just really appreciated just the storytelling of it. It wasn't necessary because that's what history is. There is a story to it and there is a tying together of the story. And I appreciate instead of just being a bunch of facts of battles and dates and locations and names that you would never remember, there was the story to it. So I know that, as I mentioned, I've done it with various ages at the same time. So can you tell me a little bit about this buffet style approach to teaching history?
Sure. I love to talk about this. And before I do, let me define some of the problems that lead us to needing a buffet style approach. So there's so many common traps we run into going from traditional education to home. So first of all, when we think of the experience that most of us had in a traditional school or a private school, first they divide students by grade level, not by ability. And it's just not necessarily family friendly. It kind of misses the whole point of the, one room schoolhouse. So there's that trouble. So often we think of needing history, say, for fourth grade and then I need it for eighth grade or back up to first grade. We think grade level when that's a lot of wear and tear on a mama. But number two, another trap we fall into is thinking that one size fits all for subjects. That's just because of the way most material has been laid out. There's a beginning and an end, and you hope you get through a whole book. And let me clarify that in our stair-step subjects, there are some subjects that certainly require mastery, like you need to learn step A before you can get to B. We'll see that in language arts, for example, where you need to know how to build a sentence before you can write a paragraph. Or in math, you need to know how to add before you can subtract. But there's a host of subjects that I would call living subjects, like earth science or Bible or history, which can go any and all directions. They're my favorite because they're just so much more loose-ended, you know what I'm saying? And you can deep dive freely through these living subjects, going as slow or fast as you want. And that's where the buffet style works really good for these living subjects. But there is one more problem that we run into, and that is just for our own material. I realized a few years ago that we have grown to the point that we look more complicated than we really are. My experience comes from, I was at a homeschool convention, which I love to go to. I hope people can get to them because you can meet authors directly, thumb through books. So I was at a convention and a lady came up to me real sincerely and she's like, "Oh, I've had my eye on the mystery of history, but I just don't think I could do it all. It looks so complicated." Well, first my heart sunk because I meant for it to be an easy to use program. I wrote it for people like me. I'm not the most organized. I'm a helter-skelter, last minute. I'm a Mary at heart, not a Martha. I was never the lady that had it all together. So it saddened me that she said that. But what I also realized is that because we've been around more than 20 years, there's some truth to us looking complicated because we now have 4 volumes, not just 1 or 2. We've also dipped into a world of digital and physical products. So when you go to our website, there's like 100 products, and partly just because one's paper, one's digital. So that looks complicated. And anyway, I wrote the program to be very linear, like turn the page and do the next thing. But when we went to hardback books, there's a separate digital companion guide with all the curriculum. And so anyway, I realized that we needed to look at the whole program in a new, fresh way. So I came up with this buffet style approach just to give people a word picture. So I will dive into that. Are you ready for what this word picture is? Okay.
Go for it.
Well, it's real simple, but picture yourself at a buffet line. You're at your favorite restaurant or a cafeteria where you get a tray and then you start. Well, most often, not too far down the very beginning of the row, there's your main dish. There's like a protein or your entree. So if you picture putting that on your tray, to me, that's the equivalent of getting your world history lesson. That's reading one of our chapters. And just like in a restaurant situation, a parent's going to help a little kid, decide what to put on their plate. But you get your main dish. And then after that, honestly, everything else our program has to offer is a side dish. And the reason I like this visual is that we need to let go of some of this guilt we carry when we take traditional materials, bring them home, and expect ourselves to do it all. Let's keep in mind a lot of curriculums have been written for classrooms, not for a family. It goes back to being grade specific or whatever. But if you look at your curriculum as a buffet, where as the parent, you oversee what the kids put on their plate, and you just start with the main thing. If the main thing be literature that day, or the main thing be math, or the main thing be history, you take care of the main things. And after that, it's all about side dishes and using your wisdom and your own maturity and knowing your family well as to what you're going to add. So if I could kind of flesh this out, I'll give you some examples with some of our products. So let's say it's one of these super busy days and you just know you're locked in and not getting to much. Then by grabbing the main dish, the entree, perhaps that's literally just listening to an audiobook lesson in the car on the way to soccer. Maybe they additionally have a coloring page, in the car if it's a longer trip. So that's your easy day. You're done because you got the main thing. You got the history lesson. You got the Peloponnesian War. So done. But then let's say another day you have a bit more of an appetite. You're actually home. You don't have a bunch of errands. And on that day, hopefully, not only do you pick the main dish, but you add maybe 2 side dishes. So you read a lesson, maybe it's on the Trojan War, but then you do a hands-on activity, which is really simple. They might take a toy horse, wrap it with an ace bandage, stick a couple of army men in it, just reenact it. And then even on top of that, you might add a timeline figure to something you've already started on the wall. So that's a good, probably normal day where you get to do something hands-on plus a lesson. But let's say once in a great while, you want to go all out and you just want to have a feast. And on that day, you get an appetizer, entree, 2 side dishes, and dessert. So using our program, say that's a pretest, the lesson, oh, they make a memory card. That's just a homemade flashcard. You do a mapping exercise, you actually dig out those atlases, and then you start that one historical fiction read aloud that you know is going to fit the time period. So that's a feast day. And I know it sounds simple, but you'd be surprised how many people get tripped up and don't allow themselves that much flexibility and freedom. Just out of our nature, again, maybe from bringing traditional school home, or just the weight of expectation that is on us. Homeschooling has come a long way. So I hope people aren't quite as harsh on new folks homeschooling as they were on me 30 years ago when I was a veteran and what we were doing was so out of the box. You know what I'm saying? There was a lot of scrutiny that went with that. So anyway, do you want to comment on that? Can you see my word picture? This any clarification?
No, I can see that. And I appreciate that because I will be honest, at first, I came from that school mindset and looked at this was before when I got volume 1, it wasn't a hardcover then. It would have been the
paperback.
Yeah, the paperback. And there was a lot in it. And I had to realize that I can let some things go. We can make it what will work for our family. And I love that there is so much there. It might be a year that a family says, you know what, we are going to go hardcore on history and we'll make sure we get our math and some reading done, but I really want to do a lot of history. And your family maybe is really history buffs. There's so much in there. You could just bulk it out so much. And so there might be another year that mom just had a baby and you're saying, I don't want to miss out on history. We're enjoying this. And you just read one of the lessons each day, one of the stories, and you can call that good. So that's what I appreciate. And I appreciate that you're talking about this because it really does help moms to just let go, like you're saying, to let go of those expectations and to realize we have the flexibility, we have the freedom. These are all words you just used, and I wrote them down because I'm like, it's so good that the mystery of history is flexible. You have the freedom to make it your own and to really enjoy history. I think there's a lot of us who went to school and didn't enjoy history. And I will say from experience, mystery of history has caused me to enjoy it. And I also really liked how you're saying how you can bulk out things. There might be a certain time period or a certain, say the Peloponnesian War, I don't know, it captures one of your children's imagination and they want to read more about it and they want to study it more. Maybe there's YouTube videos you can find, maybe you have this all listed, maybe you have different resources that are in there, but you can really allow children to become enamored even by a certain figure in history or a certain time period. So I appreciate that. So when we're talking about all these different ages, what are the benefits of this approach to learning history for all the different ages?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, not to be too redundant, but it does allow you the very words you commented on: freedom, flexibility. But let me add appealing choices, because knowing your kids, which is one of the most beautiful things about home education, is that you know if your student would rather, when you're studying earthworms, go find one in the backyard or diagram it. Because I had 2 kids that were completely different. One definitely wanted to be outdoors, finding it and naming it and feeding it. And the other one really would have rather had a worksheet with the body parts of it. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And wanted to file it away. So the appealing choices to me goes a really long way. And what I mean by that in the mystery history particularly is that we have what we call enrichment activities. So following every lesson, there are activities for younger, middle, and older students. They look different, but say, let's go back to the Trojan War. Everybody read the same story. All ages can enjoy it if you're 4 or 104. But what the little guys do is certainly something using their senses, because that's just tangible to them. They need their senses to remember things. They're not going to get the big picture. They're not connecting to other eras or anything like that, but they're remembering the horse. So like I described earlier, they played with a horse that day, where the middle student might write a diary page about being one of those soldiers that smuggled in. And the older one may need to do on the Trojan War bigger, because it's quite the story what was going on between Sparta and the Trojans. So there's that. There's appealing choices that you can just scale. And what's interesting, kind of to me looking back, is that my son, who was a middle student, and my daughter, who was a younger student at the time I wrote, and I also had a high schooler, I pictured him as a middle schooler doing a lot more big things. But he was a boy. And so when he looked at what Ashley got to do, which was all the fun hands-on stuff, he was all about that. So, I mean, sometimes you're going to break the rules on this definition of their age, and you're really going to go with their bent. He was a boy. So that meant if she was doing an activity that involved setting something on fire, which there's a lot of that. We burnt maps, the edges and stuff to make them look aged. He loved that. Or you get to put something in the blender. We had a stinky dye we made to represent the Phoenicians who made this dye that stunk, made out of snails, and, from the Murex snail. Anyway, just weird things. He certainly, though he was a middle schooler, much preferred the hands-on stuff. And as he got older, I slipped him a few things age appropriate. But anyway, so benefits, the appealing choices. Also, the reality of our lives is that some days it really does fall apart. I don't care how together you are. That's life. We hit crises, we hit loss. And it's days like that. I love that we can offer audiobooks for something that the kids can do alone. I literally hand out free audiobooks sometimes to families who maybe they've had a house fire or a flood or a tornado, or just something where mom and dad are truly putting things back together, or there's been a divorce in the family or a death in the family. So we do have to give ourselves grace on those days we have to minimize. That's when you take that simple choice. And then on better days, sure, it's great when we can provide a sit down meal and all be at the table together. I love to literally picture the family sprawled at a kitchen table with atlases open and, some reference books and cool things. But that's not every day. It's just not. It's just not. And then I also like the freedom of the special occasions when, again, we can hold a feast and go all out. And back to talking about how there's grade levels or not, isn't it sweet when I love it when the family's in the same time period all together. So again, you don't want to have a fourth grader in ancient times and an eighth grader in medieval times and a high schooler in modern. That's so much wear and tear on a teaching parent. But when the whole family can be in ancient or the whole family in medieval, well, then when you literally want to host a medieval feast and it's going to get messy and take a lot of extra time, you want to do that once, not 3 times for every time somebody hits 8th grade. So anyway, there is time for the big picture, and it makes some great family memories. So I guess when it's all said and done, I think using our world history curriculum is a lot like feeding your family. Sometimes it's drive-through. You're lucky to throw them a hamburger in the back seat. And other days there's more. So I like that.
I agree with the all ages kind of thing. And like I had mentioned, I felt like, and I think a lot of us do, because we know in 3rd grade, you have a specific history and science, and every 3rd grader is doing that. And you have an older sibling in 5th grade, they're doing something, but this can be done with all ages. And like you're saying, even those enrichment activities are geared towards different ages. And I like how you said, know your kids, know what they're going to want to do. And the first time I went through it, I guess he would have been 4 and 5 years old, my youngest, and he would just play with Legos. He'd roll out of the room, and once in a while, then maybe at dinner, I'd say, hey, we would start talking about what we read in history, and he would just I remember there was one time he yelled, like, he would have been a little bit older when we got to Joan of Arc. He just yelled, Joan of Arc or something. I was like, all right, he heard something. And the other two then put some more meat on the bones of that, of just, he remembered the name. And then as I had gone through all of it with them, then I realized that he had kind of missed the younger years because he just didn't remember. He didn't remember what he did the day before, at that age. So it was fun to be able to go through again than just him and I, and then he actually remembered it. So I completely agree with that. and you don't have to go through it a second time. I'm not telling everybody that they have to. I just felt like it was so beneficial to my older two to do it chronologically and to do it from a biblical worldview. And guess what? I didn't have to pull tons of resources from all kinds of things. I could just open the book and go to the next lesson and read the next lesson. And so it made it really simple.
Sure.
So
and in an ideal world, some families, if you start young enough, even though you might be thinking, oh, my second grader doesn't need world history yet. Well, there's some truth to that, but they can build these great memories and think school's fun. So I encourage people to start young, because if you do, then there is probably room in your scope and sequence to hit it again. And let's say when the second grader did, I don't know, something on Greece where they got to burn a map, that's as much as their mind remembers. But when they go back and they're in seventh grade and they do it again, well, they're challenged to an activity on a harder level, and they're actually filling out that map. And so, yeah, in an ideal situation, you can repeat it twice. A few folks will get through it 3 times. I think the third time is really stretching it. It may be just that the third time you are really hitting high school and you only pick one volume and prioritize that, which, by the way, if people are interested, we recommend volume 4 for high school, because it is modern and that's what's most relevant to them. It's going to give them the history of Iran, of how and why there's a North Korea, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and on it goes. So yeah, volume 4, if you have to just jump around, go to volume 4 for high school.
And that would make sense then. It would relate to what they're hearing maybe on the news or on social media, or they're hearing around when you hear the name of Iran and then you actually studied how that all came about. Then that would put into context. Because if you just jump into the news any one day, you're just like, I don't know what's going on. But if you have that foundation. So let me close with this question I have for you, because you're a history buff and we just don't need to know, what is your favorite time period in history?
I love that question. You know, the honest truth is, it's whatever era I'm probably working on. It becomes my new favorite. Like, I thought I would never be more excited than ancient. Well, then I wrote medieval and it's like, well, that's juicy. And then I went to Renaissance and I loved that because of the art history. And then when I got to modern, I was shocked how much I enjoyed it, but it began to overlap into my own life. For example, writing about Watergate was super interesting to me because I was a kid during Watergate and I had memories of it without fully understanding it. So I enjoyed rehashing that. But to fully answer your question and be revealing, right now I'm actually writing The Mystery of American History. So there is a 5th volume in the making. I almost hesitate to reveal it now because it's going to be quite a few years. So don't think that I'm going to have American history ready in even 2 or 3 years. It'll be longer than that. It's quite an investment of time. However, I am writing it. And so now, of course, I just finished the Civil War and I survived the American Revolution, the Civil War. I'm almost halfway done. And so that has become my new favorite topic. I'm really enjoying the things I'm learning on a new level, even personally, because like you mentioned earlier, most of us we're a little undertaught in history, period. Memories of it from our own growing up are usually dismal. We had boring textbooks or just a coach teaching it who didn't have a passion for the subject. He just had to fill it in. So some of our poor experiences have contributed to us being iffy about it. But something happens as we grow older. We realize how important it is. We want to relearn it again. And so we have, like you said, a lot of parents just as inspired to be learning history right along with their kids. You don't have to be a master of the subject to teach it. You learn with them.
I love that. We get to learn with them. And I've learned way more of history in the past, 14 years of homeschooling than I ever did when I was in school. So we will be watching for that. I know you said a couple of years, but that's okay. We will patiently wait. So if the listener wants to be able to connect with you and to know when that is out, maybe to learn more about what you do have out, where can they go to find more about you?
Sure. If you go to my website, a couple things that are a little lesser known is I also have a podcast. I have a newsletter you can subscribe to that will give product updates. I have self-paced classes and video lectures. So our website is themysteryofhistory.com. You don't want to leave out themysteryofhistory.com. That's the full URL.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. I will drop that link for that, your podcast, for all the things in the show notes so the listener can go to. And before I close out, when you were talking about the listening to it, I remember, so again, this is how old I am. I don't know how it's now set, but we had CDs. I had bought the CDs for it. And I don't even know if do cars, even brand new cars, have CD players? I don't know, but I had the CDs, and it was just, I remember having one year where there was a lot of activities, a lot of driving around to do, and it helped to fill that time. And I wasn't feeling guilty at all about missing history, because we would then just listen to a lesson in the car on the way to soccer or the way to a church activity or something like that. So a little plug for those two, for those years that you just find yourself busy and in the car more than at home.
And even our lessons, if you did nothing but just listen to the lessons or read them, students will really have probably more world history than most adults walking around, because, again, we weren't well taught. So
yep.
Go for it.
I absolutely agree with that. So thank you for joining me today, Linda.
Thank you. It was so nice to be here.
Thank you for listening, friend. I'd love to connect with you more. You can find social media links in the show notes, and share this episode with a friend who could use a boost to her homeschool. See you back here real soon.